Hello everyone, I am so excited to share my story with you today. This isn't just any ordinary story. This is the story of how I followed my dreams to Paris, learned English, and changed my life. I want to tell you something really important. If you have a dream, no matter how big or small, never give up on it. You can do anything if you believe in yourself. This is my journey, and I hope it inspires you to chase your own dream. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Danielle. I am 25 years old, and I come from a small town. Ever since I was a child, I dreamed of seeing the world, the big cities, the famous landmarks, the cultures. I wanted to experience everything. But in my town, not many people talk about dreams like that. Most people stayed, found jobs nearby, and lived a simple life. But I wanted more. I wanted to explore, learn new things, and make something special of my life. One day, I watched a travel video about Paris. The Eiffel Tower, the charming street, the little cafes, it looked so magical. That was the moment I knew I had to go to Paris. But there was one problem. I did not speak English very well, and I didn't know any French. So how would I survive in Paris? When I told my parents about my dream, they did not understand at first. Paris? How will you get there? You don't even speak English well enough, my mom said. You're still learning, my dad added. Why not just stay here and focus on your job? But I did not let their doubts stop me. I believed in myself, and I kept talking to them about my dream every day. I told them that I would learn English, work hard, and go to Paris for a new opportunity. At first, they were still unsure, but I did stop. I kept showing them how serious I am. One day, I decided to show them something. I picked up my phone and started practicing English aloud in front of them. I read out loud from an English book, repeating new words and situations. I was nervous, but I did not care. Slowly, my parents began to see that I am committed to my dream. That night, I sat with them and said, I really want to go to Paris. This is my dream, and I make it happen. To my surprise, my mom smiled and said, if this is your dream, then go for it. My dad nodded, and for the first time, I feel that they believed in me. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but no, I had their support. The next few months were busy. I applied to a university in Paris, worked part-time to save money, and practiced English every single day. I followed a simple routine that made a big difference. Morning, I practiced speaking by reading books and newspaper aloud. Afternoon, I listened to English podcasts or watched English movies to improve my understanding. Evening, I wrote short stories in English to practice my writing. There were many days when I made mistakes. Sometimes I did not know how to say something and I felt embarrassed. But each time I just kept going. I knew that mistakes were part of the journey. Slowly, I became more confident in my English skills. Finally, the day arrived. I received my acceptance letter from the university in Paris. I could believe it. I was really going to Paris. The day I left for Paris, I felt both excited and nervous. My parents packed my bag with love. My mom gave me a small notebook saying, write down everything you learn and everything you experience in Paris. At the airport, I felt a mix of emotions, nervous but so happy. I said goodbye to my parents with a promise, I shall make you proud. The plane took off, and as I looked out of the window, I thought, this it is. My dream is finally coming true. When I arrived in Paris, everything felt new and exciting. The streets were full of life. People were speaking French all around me, and the buildings looked amazing. But I quickly realized one thing. I had to use English to survive. From ordering food to asking for direction, I needed to speak English everywhere. The first time I asked for a coffee, I was so nervous. My words come out slowly and I made a mistake in my sentence. But the cashier smiled and said, "No problem, take your time." I felt relieved. That night, as I sat by the window of my small apartment, looking at the Eiffel Tower, I couldn't believe how far I do. I had made it to Paris, but now the real challenge was just beginning. When I woke up on my second day in Paris, the sun was shining through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. I could hear the sound of the city outside, people talking, cars passing by, and the occasional honk of a horn. It felt like a dream, but at the same time, everything was so real. I had finally made it to Paris, and now I had to face the biggest challenge of all, learning English. Sure, I had learned a few words and phrases back home, but here in the heart of the city, I would have to use English every day. The pressure was on. I had no choice but to dive in. I had to speak English to buy groceries, ask for direction, and communicate with the people around. That if I made a mistake, what if they couldn't understand me? But I knew I could not run away from this. If I wanted to success, I had to push through my fears. My first task was simple. I needed food. It was just about eating. It was about surviving in a new place. So I decided to go to the local market. I made a list in my notebook, translating everything from my native language into English. Apples, bread, milk, cheese, nothing too complicated. I walked into the store, feeling nervous. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a little lost. There were so many people and everyone seems to be moving fast. I took a deep breath and walked toward the fruits and vegetables. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound confident. The shopkeeper turned to me. "How much is this apple?" She looked at me for a second confused. I repeated myself a little louder. "How much is this apple?" She smiled and replied in slow English, €1. Could not believe it. I had just successfully used English to ask the question and get an answer. It was a small win, but it felt huge. I continued through the store, repeating the same process for everything on my list. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. By the time I was ready to pay, I was feeling much better. I even managed to ask for a big in English, and the cashier replied with a friendly smile. That day, I felt like a small victory had been achieved. I was perfect, but I was trying, and that was the most important thing. The next day, I decided to enroll in an English language class. I found a language school not far from my apartment and walked in, hoping they would accept me. The school had a friendly atmosphere and everyone spoke English with different accents. I signed up for a beginner class and I was ready to get serious about learning. The first day of class was a bit overwhelming. There were people from all over the world: Spain, Japan, Brazil, and even Russia. We all come to Paris for different reasons, but one thing brought us together: our desires to learn English. The teacher, Mr. Sarah, was kind and patient. She started with simple words and phrases, explaining everything clearly. At first, I felt like I was the slowest in the class. Some of the others were already more fluent than me. They spoke with confidence, and I could not help but compare myself. But Mr. Swara noticed this and encouraged me, saying, "Don't worry, Daniel. Everyone learn at their own pace. Just keep practicing and you will get better." Her words made me feel better. I knew she was right. I had to stop comparing myself to others and focus on my own progress. I began taking notes, paying extra attention to pronunciation and practicing after class. I would listen to English podcasts on the way home, repeating what I had learned. It was hard work, but I was determined. As the weeks went by, I started to make new friends in class. One of them, Maria from Brazil, became my study friend. She had been learning English for a while, and we spent hours after class practicing. Sometimes we would meet at a cafe near the school, sitting with our notebook and coffee cup, writing down new words and phrases. We would laugh at our mistakes, but we never stopped trying. Maria taught me one important lesson. Mistakes are not something to be afraid of. Every mistake is a step forward, she would say with a smile. And I started to believe her. I was not perfect, but every time I made a mistake, I learned something new. Outside of class, I made an effort to use English in every situation. I practiced ordering food in English at restaurants, asking for help on the streets, and talking to people in the park. Sometimes the local did not understand me completely, but they were always patient, and that made me feel comfortable. One afternoon, I went to a cafe to read a book in English. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching people walk by. A woman sat down at the table next to me and smiled. She was reading a book in English as well, and I noticed that it was the same book I had been reading. "Excuse me," I said. "I am reading the same book. How are you liking it?" To my surprise, she answered in perfect English, "Oh, it's wonderful. What part are you on?" We began talking about the book and so on. We were talking about all sorts of things: Paris, travel, language, and life. This was the first time I had a real conversation in English, and it felt amazing. We exchanged phone numbers and we promised to meet again. That was turning point for me. I realized that English was not just a language, it was learning. It was became a part of my life. Months passed and my English improved every day. I could see the progress I was making. I could speak to people without feeling nervous. And I could understand almost everything I read or heard. But more than that, I had gained something more valuable: confidence. I was no longer afraid to speak up. I had learned that mistakes were not something to be ashamed of, they were part of the process. With each mistake, I grew stronger, and with every small victory, I felt closer to my dream. One day I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking at the Eiffel Tower in the distance. It had been almost a year since I first arrived in Paris. I had made it. I had learned English. I had built a new life for myself. It was not just about the language, it was about the courage to follow my dreams, the patience to keep going, and the belief that I could do it. Even when it seemed impossible, Paris had become my home, and English had become my bridge to the world. The sun was beginning to set over Paris, casting a golden hue across the city. I sat by my window, looking at the Eiffel Tower. It had been a year since I arrived in this beautiful city, and in this time I had faced so many challenges. I had left behind everything. I had stepped into the unknown and learned a new language from scratch. But now everything felt different. The fear that once held me back had disappeared. I could speak English confidently, and I was no longer just a visitor in Paris. It felt like